So welcome to the LaRouche PAC Strategic Overview for Monday, November 28th, 2022. I'm Benjamin Denniston with the LaRouche Political Action Committee. I will be joined today by Tony Pappert. We'll get right to Tony in just a second. It's obviously a very exciting and rapidly developing political situation following these midterm elections. And LaRouche PAC is out the gate with our new initiative we've launched, Project Prometheus, which I'm sure we'll get into a bit in both Tony's remarks and also in the Q&A discussion for people joining us via Zoom. We're viewing this as a critical intervention to lay the groundwork for a victory in 2024, not just an electoral victory to ensure Trump gets reelected and ensure the America First, patriotic, anti-globalist factions in the United States win the election, but also to make sure that we have the right policy that we need. You know, we need victories, political victories, election victories, but we also need the right policies. We need the right changes in the actual orientation of the country and economic policies, most importantly, to ensure that we can get this nation back on track and actually fulfill the real meaning and destiny of the United States and the importance of the United States to contribute to the development of the planet and really beyond. So we have a lot to talk about, a lot of exciting developments. I'm sure there's still some people a little demoralized from the elections and all the crazy propaganda around it, but there should be no despair. We have a very clear and exciting perspective right now for where we need to go and what we can do to make that happen. So I don't want to say much more than that. I just want to hand it over to Tony, and we'll open up his presentation here, and then we'll take your questions and look forward to the discussion. So Tony.
Thanks, Ben. I'd like to begin by reading parts of President Trump's announcement for President 2024 last November 15th. It was very inspiring to me, and I'm sure many of you. I'd like to note that he takes a very broad view, and the conflict which he's discussing there is not, it's far from simply between Democrats and Republicans. He takes a much broader view. So let's read from some parts of that announcement. He said, these are just fragments, but to me they're important. He said, "This is not for any one individual. This is a job for tens of millions of proud people working together from all across the land and from all walks of life, young and old, black and white, Hispanic and Asian, many of whom we have brought together for the very, very first time." He said, "When people say Republicans or Democrats or liberals or conservatives, I say we could all get together, and we were doing that. I'm running because I believe the world has not yet seen the true glory of what this nation can be. We have not reached that pinnacle, believe it or not. In fact, we can go very far. We're going to have to go far. First, we have to get out of this ditch. And once we're out, you'll see things that nobody imagined for any country. This campaign will be about issues, vision, and success. And we will not stop, we will not quit until we've achieved the highest goals and made our country greater than it has ever been before. And we can do that. We can do it. Our victory will be built upon big ideas, bold ambitions, and daring dreams for America's future. We need daring dreams. It's not enough merely to complain or oppose. We will win because we will fight with every measure of our strength and with every ounce of our energy to lift up the working men and working women of America and to restore the fabric of this nation. The journey ahead of us will not be easy. Anyone who truly seeks to take on this rigged and corrupt system will be faced with a storm of fire that only a few could understand. We will be attacked. We will be slandered. We will be persecuted just as I have been. I have been, but many people in this room have been. But we will not be intimidated. We will persevere. We will stand tall in the storm. We will march forward into the torrent, and we, in the end, will win. Our country will win. We will win. We will heal our divisions and bring our people back together through incredible success. We will defend life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We will expand the frontiers of human knowledge and extend the horizons of human achievement. And we will plant our beautiful American flag very soon on the surface of Mars, which I got started. This is a very incredible but dangerous journey. If our movement remains united and confident, then we will shatter the forces of tyranny and we will unleash the glories of liberty for ourselves and for our children and for generations yet to come. So it's extreme. It takes an extremely broad view. And I would like to pursue the implications of that and pan out further into history and the world as the setting of the struggle which we are undertaking. In the world, all of you are aware, I'm sure, that there are demonstrations taking place in China, and there are demonstrations taking place in Iran, and there have been for about a month. What you may not know is that there's huge demonstrations, larger, I think, than any in China, and probably as large as those in Iran, it's not clear. But there's huge demonstrations in Europe every weekend, frequently during the week, spreading all the way from the Atlantic into Central Europe, the former countries of the Comecon, like the Czech Republic, Belarus or White Russia, and others. Europe is being swept by demonstrations. Europe has been cut off, as people realize, from Russian energy supplies. Industries are closing down in Germany, the industrial heartland of Europe. Industries are closing down in other countries, in Italy as well, in France. In Britain, small businesses are going bust. If nothing's done, Europeans will be freezing to death in large numbers, especially the elderly poor, this winter. Now, the cutoff from Russian energy, while it's severe and important, was only the most recent step. Europe has been stepping into energy shutdown, not for months, but for years. In West Germany, which led that process, West Germany legislated in 2010 what they call the Energiewende, the energy change or the energy turn, which provided that the last German nuclear power plant would be shut down in 2022, this year. Now, since then, they've prolonged that a little bit. And the last German coal-fired plant, and Germany's a country which has no oil, no natural gas, has a lot of coal, which it's been using as its fuel for centuries. But they legislated in 2010 that the last German coal plant will shut down before 2038. So Europe is shutting down. Europe is in a situation of desperation for its people, for its human resources, for its cultural heritage. And this is the world side of what we see going on in America under the Biden administration. Now, the question I posed that I sent out in the email is, who is our adversary? I mean, is it the Democrats? Well, in one sense, yes, but in the bigger sense, obviously, no. Is it Biden? Well, yes, in one sense, yes, but in the bigger sense, no. Who is the adversary with whom we're struggling? And here, as I said in that email, here I call on the ghost of Edgar Allan Poe, but more immediately, the Iliad of Homer. And I did an English translation, or I pasted together an English translation of the first 7+ lines of the Iliad, which is called the proem, sort of a prologue. And this is what it says. It's in English. It says, "Sing, O goddess, the wrath of Achilles, the son of Peleus, which was accursed, which brought numberless woes upon the Greeks, and hurled many valiant souls of heroes down to Hades. and made their bodies into booty for dogs and a feast for the birds. But Zeus's plan was being accomplished. So, for those of you who know the story, whether by reading it or in other ways, I mean, this does describe the plot of the Iliad as Homer composed it, that the wrath of Achilles, his fierce fight with Agamemnon, the Greek maximum leader of the Greek expedition, resulted in the deaths of many, many Greeks. And maybe put it back up if you don't mind. It would result in the deaths of many Greeks. So in a sense, this is what happened. But the mystery for many readers is that last 3, 4, 5, 6 words. But Zeus's plan was being accomplished. Zeus's plan was being accomplished. What was the plan? What was Zeus's plan that was being accomplished as all the heroes of the Greeks, or not all, but almost all of the heroes of the Greeks, were being murdered or killed, going to Hades, their bodies torn apart by animals? What was Zeus's plan? Well, here, this is the second of my figures. An ancient commentator, it's presumably Aristarchus, it's the second one. Yeah, correct. This is the scholiast on Homer, explaining, or in other words, the commentator on Homer, I believe in this case was Aristarchus, is explaining those 6 words, but Zeus's plan was being accomplished, quotes another ancient epic, which was in effect a companion piece for the Iliad, to explain what was Zeus's plan that was being accomplished. And he quotes another poem, mostly lost, called the Cypria or Cypria, which described events preceding the Trojan War, or preceding the Iliad. And what it said was that this following, there was a time when the countless tribes of men, though wide dispersed, oppressed the surface of the deep-bosomed earth. And Zeus saw it, that is the earth, and had pity, and in his wise heart resolved to relieve the all-nurturing earth of men by causing the great struggle of the Trojan War, that the load of death might empty the world. And so the heroes were slain in Troy, and the plan of Zeus came to pass. The plan of Zeus came to pass, paralleling those 6 words at the end of the fragment above. So what this says is that Zeus's plan was population reduction, to ease the burden of Earth by killing off the human beings which were burdening the Earth. So what is this? This is a species characteristic of oligarchism or empire. This is what is called in modern terms Malthusianism, population control, population reduction. It's a species characteristic of oligarchism or empire, which we find from the most ancient times, going back way before Homer. Homer was writing perhaps 800 or 900 BC, but this goes back to as far as we can trace written history, which is far older than that, that oligarchism or empire bears the species characteristic of Malthusian population reduction. And this is why I referenced Poe in the email introduction to this, that it was Poe, the detective, who in his detective story Murders in the Rue Morgue, and also in his nonfiction article, Maelzel's chess playing machine, or Maelzel's chess machine, whatever the title was, he points out to the reader this scientific question of species characteristic, which he does that in solving the murders and also similarly in solving the mystery of the chess playing machine. This is a permanent species characteristic of what is our actual adversary, not Democrats, not Biden, but the thing behind them, which is controlling them to a large extent, which is making them act as they do, which is oligarchism, which is a continuous stripe throughout human history from the earliest recorded history. And it's oligarchism which we confront today in the so-called climate change dogma, the green cult, the global warming hoax. And I just like to illustrate that with yet another figure, that Britain, the imperial Britain, especially Britain from the 17th century, Britain from the 1600s, imperial Britain carried a tradition of what we call Malthusianism, which is otherwise called by the British eugenics. And this is a brief timeline, which I think will make the point. Much more could be said, but at least what's said here is demonstrably true. 1798, Britain's Parson Thomas Malthus writes his book called Essays on the Principles of Population, in which he says that diseases should be left unchecked and untreated to limit the numbers of the poor so that they'll die off because we can't support any more of them. In the 19th century, you had the sons of Charles Darwin and his associates like Thomas Huxley were the founders of British eugenics. And when we get to the British Eugenics Society, when we get to the 20th century, Sir Julian Huxley, a leader of the British Eugenics Society, became the first Director General of UNESCO, United Nations organization, and at his founding meeting, or at the time of the founding, he wrote that one of UNESCO's tasks was to make the ideas of eugenics thinkable again after Hitler had just made them unthinkable in World War II. 1948, Huxley's UNESCO forms the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and at the founding meeting, Huxley says, the spread of man must take second place to the conservation of other species. The spread of man must take second place to the conservation of other species. 1960, the IUCN founds the World Wildlife Fund under Britain's Prince Philip, who just died, and former Nazi Party member Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who died a few years ago. 1962, Rachel Carson publishes Silent Spring. People who are familiar with that book, it led eventually to the banning of DDT worldwide and millions of preventable deaths from malaria in poor countries. 1970, leading members of the WWF's financial arm, the 1001 Club, launched Earth Day. 1974, kooky anthropologist Margaret Mead is a key organizer of the World Population Conference in Bucharest, attended by representatives of 135 nations and addressed by John D. Rockefeller III, whose family had sponsored eugenics before World War II here in the US. 1975, this is the last point I'm going to make, the same Margaret Mead, who was also president of the American Academy for the Advancement of Science, organized a conference at Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, where global warming, later called climate change, was launched. And, for many of you, needless to add, global warming, later called climate change, was launched under the same premise that humanity damages the earth, that, as Huxley said, the interests of humanity must take second place to interests of other plants and animals on earth. And as they said at Bucharest, population must be limited to preserve nature. Admittedly, not all the people who are suckers for global warming or the carbon dioxide hoax openly argue that population must be limited. But the reality is that the only thing that allows mankind to support 8 million people on Earth is the use of fossil fuels, coal, oil, natural gas, and which we'll be using for a long time, even while we move on to nuclear fusion energy. Without these, the Earth's population will turn negative and die off, as we're watching happen now in Europe, and as we'll see in the United States, if this adversary continues to set our policies. So this is oligarchism, otherwise known as imperialism. It has one characteristic which we've looked at to some extent over the past few minutes. It also is a monetary system. A monetary system is a species character of oligarchism, aka imperialism, from the most ancient known times, even though the particulars of that monetary system have changed over the millennia. But it involves a private monopoly on credit. It includes monetarism, the fetishism of money. Money is believed to have value, which is untrue. Money is believed to determine economy, which is true only if you permit it. The greatest enemy of oligarchism, aka imperialism, since 1763 and before our revolution, has been America. It's not only our notion all men are created equal and endowed by their creator, but the same image of man, or the same notion of man, which governs those words from the Declaration of Independence, the same divine spark of man, also governs our American system of economy, as put in our Constitution in Article 1, Section 8, as public credit. Public credit federal credit was responsible for all our great leaps forward in economy in the 1700s, during and after the Civil War, during and after World War II, and in the space epoch, begun under Kennedy and then aborted with his assassination, to be resumed today. And this is the picture in which we come today with the initiative for Project Prometheus, as Ben said earlier, for a nuclear renaissance leading a reindustrialization of the United States throughout all basic industry, and also the elevation of the labor force of the country, and a higher level of technology for the entire economy. So it's within this, it's as a spearhead for this American system that we launched Project Prometheus about 2 weeks ago. As I say, I mean, our country was the greatest enemy of this imperialism, which has been London-centered imperialism over these past centuries, since the 1600s. All the wars since 1763 have been connived by the British Empire against the United States. Not only our Revolutionary War, the Napoleonic Wars, which were to trample on continental Europe as a potential rival of Britain to prevent the American Revolution from taking place there. Our Civil War, manipulated from London, the Crimean War to the same effect, World War I and II. They were, again, continuations, in effect, of the 7 Years' War, the world and the Napoleonic Wars, to chop off the heads of the European nations and prevent the American Revolution from taking hold in Europe. The Vietnam War and the forever wars launched in the Middle East by recent presidents have been directed against the United States, not these foreign countries. They've been directed by British interests and British agents of influence within against the United States, the hereditary enemy, the hereditary adversary of oligarchism, aka imperialism. So now we don't have to put it on the screen, but I'm going to go back to the Iliad, because this takes us to the parting of the ways that stand before us at the moment. One was the Iliad. The Iliad, the Homeric Iliad, say composed around 900 or 800 BC. It was like a message in a bottle from 300 to 400 years before. At the time Homer composed the Iliad in 800 or 900 BC, most of the cities mentioned in that work no longer existed. There was either wilderness or small villages where the greatest cities in the Iliad had been. Why? Because the intervening centuries, from the Trojan War 1200 BC, which Homer was describing, to his own time, 800 or 900 BC, those intervening 3 or 4 centuries were the centuries of what's called the Dark Age of Greece, or more broadly, the Dark Age of the Eastern Mediterranean. It has other names as well. Population levels collapsed. Cities were abandoned. There were no cities. Cities became uninhabited. Literacy vanished. A high civilization, which had existed before roughly 1200 BC, called today Mycenaean Greece, crumbled into basically savagery. And it was only centuries later that Greece climbed out of the rubble, literacy was reintroduced, new cities were founded, and another age of Greece began with only fragmentary knowledge of what had preceded. I mean, Homer's account is one of the things they had left from the civilization which had fallen into darkness early. If you want to get some idea of this dark age of Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean, many of you have probably read Aesop's fables. Now, these come down to us from Greece, and from the Greek language. They have many sources, related sources, and they're of varying ages. But if you remember Aesop's fables, have you noticed that everyone in these fables, man or beast, is at the point of starvation from the beginning of every fable through to the end, unless they get something to eat in the meantime. It's a whole world of starving people. That's an echo of the Dark Age, which separated Homer from the previous Greek civilization. Another reflection of this is, I referred to an epic called the Kypria. The Iliad and the Odyssey were part of a cycle of epics, of which all the others, it's supposedly consisting total of 8, I think, of which the others have been wholly or partly lost. They only exist in fragments or people's writing about them. But one of those and they covered the period from the earliest beginnings, which led to the Trojan War, through the Trojan War, and then out of it. One of those which follows the Iliad in time was called Nostoi, Homecomings, and recorded the homecomings of the Greek heroes from Troy. And, if you look at the homecomings, they also testify to what Homer knew, or Homer, or the poet of the Nostoi, assuming it was somebody else, what these poets knew. Agamemnon came home to be murdered by his wife almost as soon as he stepped into his house. Odysseus came home to fight to the death against 108 marauders who had taken over his estates and his home under the pretense of seeking the hand of his wife. So these homecomings also record the fact that after the Trojan War, Greece fell into a dark age. Now, and this topic is one discussed by Plato, not this particular Greek dark age, but the general subject, which is of interest to us right now, and of what causes civilization to collapse. What causes a civilization to survive? Where are the seeds of the destruction of the civilization? Where can they be found? So Plato broached this in the dialogue mostly lost, called Critias, which involved the loss of Atlantis, which was apparently lost due to natural causes. But the question of the loss of a civilization, whether by natural causes, whether by human causes, this was one that redounds through Socrates' work and Plato's dialogues once you realize it. This was also the discussion of our founding fathers. And, at both when they convened for the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, in the question of the ratification of the Constitution, and they were looking at ancient examples and among other historical examples to answer the question, what enables a society to survive durably? What are the seeds of a collapse of civilization? What can be done to root them out? So this is the question which confronts us at this moment. The demonstrations we see in Europe, the processes which I described, not in great depth, but at least a little bit, going on in Europe, they're obviously going on here, but they're not limited to the United States. They're not limited to Europe. This is now, unlike the period in ancient times, this is now a world civilization in reality. Not a globalist, can't be allowed to be a globalist civilization. It should be a government of sovereign nation-state republics as we were created to be. But there is a world civilization. World civilization is under threat. The signs we see in Europe's walking into the graveyard, the signs we see in collapse of economy, in collapse of lifespan, which we're experiencing in the United States, in collapse of fertility levels, and therefore collapse of population levels. We're at a critical turning point in humanity. The question before us is whether our civilization enters such a period of dark age, destruction, depopulation, whether civilization continues on the planet even during the remainder of the lifetimes of those alive, or whether it's snuffed out for a greater or longer period. This is the big question, and this is why we have to win the third American Revolution, as I've called it, of Lyndon LaRouche and Donald Trump. If we don't win, nobody will win, and we have to win. So that's what I wanted to say.